World. I was down in San Diego today for a little bit of a visit with our friends down in San Diego United Methodist with my friend John Shaver, talking to his church about our Israel trip. And actually, it wasn't just his church, it was San Diego's having this interfaith week. And so I had a chance to be there with them and other churches and a couple other communities. So I know Cheryl and David made some friends there on that trip, and Joyce. Well, Joyce isn't here yet, but
I did.
I am.
yeah, we had a chance to see some of those people. There were about 7 or 8 people from the trip. Victor and Nancy Meisenhelder were there, and Herschel Jones was there, and yeah, a lot of nice people. It was great to see them all. And yeah, we had a chance to talk about why trips to Israel and why Israel is important for interfaith, and it was interesting. We came up with some interesting people had some interesting questions. And it wasn't just the people on our trip. Like I said, there were some other people who were involved from other church communities in the area in San Diego. And yeah, it was interesting. It's some interesting questions. People asked us if we went to some Muslim areas, and I said, well, we did. It's just one of them happened to be Bethlehem, which most people think of as a Christian place, but it's actually about 85, 95, maybe 95% Muslim today. So, but we, talked a little bit about it. And anyway, so it was just an up and back trip, but yeah, anyways. So I don't know if some of our other people are not going to be here. Joyce and the Schrollmans are not here yet, but
No, I'm on Zoom. Can you hear me?
Oh, sorry, Joyce. Yeah, you're on Zoom.
Yeah, I've been on for 10 minutes.
I know the Stolmans aren't. Sorry, Joyce. The Stolmans aren't here, but
The Stolmans are celebrating their 26th
they're 20. Yes, I know it's their
anniversary.
anniversary. Yeah, so we want to congratulate them in absentia
Yes.
for their anniversary. And yeah, so while we're here, we got everybody who's probably going to be here. Then we're going to jump into Deuteronomy, kind of where we left off in chapter 9, which again is Moses's recollections. Today we're going to definitely be reading the recollections of Moses, and at some point today I'm going to share with you what the big heads, what the intellectuals say about Deuteronomy, because today we're going to kind of get out of the introduction at some point towards the end of tonight. We're going to get out of the introduction. We're still kind of in the intro part where Moses is recounting the 10 Commandments and kind of like, or Mount Sinai. And as we said, he kind of skips around and talks about other things that happened even after Mount Sinai. But he's really talking to the people about how they got to where they are right now, which is the next generation ready to cross over into the promised land. So that's the way kind of Deuteronomy begins with that. And then Moses kind of steps back and talks about the 10 Commandments and which we talked about, even some of the wars against the Amorites, how they wound up with those territories on the other side of Jordan River. Several things that are, warnings and reminders to the people. Now we're going to see a couple of things that he recounts. So he recounted getting the 10 Commandments in chapter 6, and we actually have a full repetition of the 10 Commandments in their entirety. Slight differences that we pointed out. There's a couple of differences between the Exodus version and the Deuteronomy version, but again, pretty much the same, overall the same, 95% the same. And now, as we've been seeing over the last couple of chapters, that God tells the people numerous times that the Canaanites were really bad. And as much as God promised them the land, which we said right here, God promised them this land promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that it also is because of their wickedness that God is dispossessing those nations. And we finish with this line, know then that you is not any virtue of yours that your God Adonai has given you this good land to possess, for you are a stiff-necked people. And And remember, never forget how you provoked God Adonai to anger in the wilderness from the day you left the land of Egypt until you reached this place. You have continued being defiant. You've been defiant over and over again. And now he's going to tell us what happened at Mount Sinai besides hearing the Ten Commandments, because remember, the people hear the Ten Commandments, then he goes up and gets them. And that's what we're going to read today. We're going to read, that's what we're starting to read. And then we're going to get into another story. The purpose of this story, well, let's read the story. You tell me. Well, you can see the purpose. It's pretty obvious. Actually, it's it's going to be told you. The Torah will tell it to you right now. And remember, in Deuteronomy, they referred to Mount Sinai as Horeb, one of the other names, or Deuteronomy's name for Mount Sinai, or where the Ten Commandments were given. It's called Mount Horeb. And it says, at Horeb, you so provoked Adonai that Adonai was angry enough with you to have destroyed you. I had ascended the mountain to receive the tablets of stone, the tablets of the covenant that Adonai had made with you. And I stayed on the mountain 40 days and nights, eating no bread and drinking no water, which means, again, that Moses was fasting the entire time he was up there. Partly, the rabbis, by the way, add to that, that's because he's in heaven. When he's at Mount Sinai and at the top of the mountain, he's actually in heaven. He's at the nexus point between heaven and earth. So he didn't really need to eat because he's with God in heaven. And it says, and Adonai gave me the 2 tablets of stone, inscribed by the finger of God, with the exact words that Adonai had addressed to you on the mountain out of the fire on the day of the assembly. And so here it says the 10 commandments that he got were written by God, and they were the exact words that they had heard. That's what was on the 10 commandments. And here in the 10 commandments, and it says 2 tablets of stone, Shnei Luchot Habrit. The commandments are on the stone. And here, again, it says the tablets of the covenant, the tablets of stone. At the end of those 40 days and 40 nights, one thing. At the end of 40 days and 40 nights, Adonai gave me the 2 tablets of stone, the tablets of the covenant. And there it says them together. Tablets of stone are the tablets of the covenant. And Adonai said to me, hurry, go down from here at once, for the people whom you have brought out of Egypt have acted wickedly. They have been quick to stray from the path that I have enjoined upon them. They have made themselves a molten image, which is exactly the thing that they were not supposed to do in the 2nd commandment. Right there. Now, at this point right here, by the way, it doesn't say that they made themselves another god. It simply says they made for themselves a molten image, which could technically be of God. Doesn't matter. It's still breaking the commandment. But it doesn't actually say there that they're worshiping another god. It says they've made a molten image. That's what it says there. And Adonai further said to me, I see that this is a stiff-necked people. The same words that we had last week, we finished with, Am Kashe Oref, a nation that is stiff-necked. Let me alone, and I will destroy them and blot out their name from under heaven. And I will make you a nation far more numerous than they. That was Moses's, God said, I'll start over with you. I started down the mountain, a mountain ablaze with fire, the 2 tablets of the covenant in my 2 hands. I saw how you had sinned against your God, Adonai. You had made yourselves a golden calf, and you had been quick to stray from the path that Adonai had enjoined upon you. Thereupon I gripped the 2 tablets and flung them away with both my hands, smashing them before your eyes. Now, nowhere does it say here, nowhere did it say in in Exodus either, that he had any permission to do that. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say God told me to, God allowed me to, God said anything to me about it. It says I flung them and I smashed them before your eyes. It's pretty powerful. Not just I smashed them and you all saw it. Now, again, it's a different generation, but Moses was still speaking to this generation as if they were the people there. He says your all the time. He doesn't say your fathers I smashed them before you. I threw myself down before Adonai, eating no bread and drinking no water, 40 days and 40 nights as before, because of the great wrong you had committed, doing what displeased and vexed Adonai. So here it says, he fasted again for 40 days and 40 nights. For I was in dread of the fierce anger against you, which moved Adonai to wipe you out. And that time too, Adonai gave heed to me. And so he says, God listened to me, and I said, don't destroy them. Now, it doesn't say he said that here. The implication is that God said, don't destroy them. Exodus says he didn't, he told him. Here, that part's not there. Here, Moses doesn't recount what he said to them, but he again, and again, Exodus says he did. Exodus says he argued on behalf of the people. Here it says he argued on behalf of the people in the sense that it tells us that God listened to him, but it doesn't say exactly what he said or that he said no. Now, here's an interesting line. Moreover, Adonai was angry enough with Aaron to have destroyed him. So I also interceded for Aaron at that time. That is not in Exodus.
But it makes sense.
It 100% makes sense, because most of us read the story of Exodus and go, why is Aaron not punished? Why? God doesn't seem to be mad at Aaron at all. Aaron was the one who did it. The people asked him. I mean, it wasn't his idea, but he made it. The Torah says he made it. And yet we have no explanation. Well, here there is, which leads us to believe that at least by the time that this part was written, and you could say, well, Moses wrote it down a generation later, or it was written down a few hundred years later, people had essentially asked that question. Well, what about Aaron? Now,
It's almost as if someone read Exodus when they were.
There's no question that the person who wrote Deuteronomy had read Exodus. They knew what was in Exodus. They knew what they wanted to say, and they knew what they didn't want to say. And they had the same question, exactly. And they gave an answer, which is that Moses stepped in and he interceded for Aaron. So again, here's a little bit of explanation, if you will, in Deuteronomy. I just wondered if like any of the traditional commentaries, whether Rashi or any of these people, no, the traditional, it doesn't say, but Rashi does do something interesting here. So Rashi says, this denotes the extermination of one's children, and so too it states, and I destroyed the fruit of his offspring. So when it says that God was going to destroy Aaron, it wasn't necessarily that he was going to kill him, but he would destroy his children, which is what lahashmid means. Rather than say laharog, which means to kill, the root to kill, here it says to destroy. So Rashi's saying, well, it's not killing him, it's killing his kids. And so what Moses does, I prayed for Aaron also, right? And I prayed, and my prayer availed to atone half, so that only 2 of his sons died and 2 remained alive. So Rashi's explanation follows the tradition that Aaron got punished by having his sons Nadav and Abihu get killed in the scene in Leviticus, which, you know, it's an answer. It's not necessarily the best answer, but Moses actually does intercede. He gets 2 of Aaron's sons spared, which is better than having them all get killed. And that's Rashi's answer. So he follows the traditional answer that Aaron got punished by losing his sons. Again, Aaron's sons got punished because they offered up incense that they were not supposed to. Some people feel that that was too strong of a punishment, which is why they even have that answer, that they got punished because of what Aaron had done with the golden calf. And so here's kind of like a synthesis of those explanations, those answers, and the fact that Aaron is punished, but not punished as badly as God wants to punish him. Which again, it's kind of what we want to hear. We want to have an answer. We want to understand it. And so And I have a feeling that Rashi was basing that on something in the Talmud. Usually Rashi has another source that he's going to, the Talmud or the Midrash, where he's quoting us, he'll quote or base his answers on a source. So what about the calf? As for that sinful thing you made, the calf, I took it and put it into the fire, and I broke it to bits and ground it thoroughly until it was fine as dust. And I threw the dust into the brook that comes down from the mountain. Well, let's look. It doesn't say that he then made the people drink of it, right? Which is what he did. He made them drink it, and then they got sick and died. The people were responsible. Now, instead, it goes to another scene in Exodus, which is, again, you provoked Adonai at Taverah and at Massah and at Kibrot Chatavah. These are all different places where the people cried out to God. And they're not necessarily, well, they're not at all really right after each other. These are all different places where the people spoke out against God and said, where's our water? Where's our food? Why do we only have manna? So these are all places where the people cried out and provoked God. And then here's the scene, which again is recounted to us. And when Adonai sent you from Kadesh Barnea, saying, go up and take possession of the land that I'm giving you, you flouted the command of your God Adonai, whom you did not put your trust in nor obey. And that is the scene of the spies. And it's where, again, Moses has already told us his version of the spies, which is that, again, the people wanted to have spies, and God kind of let them have spies, and it just further showed their lack of faith. So it doesn't say the incident of the spies, but again, that's what happened at Kadesh Barnea. And again, where God said, go up, take the land, and the people said, we can't, we don't have enough. Even after they sent in the spies. Actually, maybe the spies made it even worse. So, what's the summary? As long as I've known you, you've been defiant toward Adonai. When I lay prostrate before Adonai those 40 days and 40 nights, because Adonai was just determined to destroy you. So what did Moses just do? He just listed out, he started at Mount Sinai, and then he kept going further, all the way up to the spies, all the way up to the book of Numbers. Okay, and now he's gone back. So that's why I say when I tell you this is a stream of consciousness, it's exactly this scene right here is exactly what just happened. Because Moses was talking about Mount Sinai, and then he got on this tangent about talking about all the other stuff that they've done beyond the golden calf, beyond, this and that, and all the way up to how they wound up being in the desert for 40 days or 40 years. And again, goes back to the 40 days and 40 nights at Mount Sinai. Even though, again, it went back to the spies, he's gone back to Mount Sinai. He's gone back again. So that's why I said it's very stream of consciousness. When I lay prostrate before Adonai those 40 days and 40 nights, because Adonai was determined to destroy you, I prayed to Adonai and said, oh Adonai, oh God, right? Oh Lord Adonai, do not annihilate your very own people, whom you redeemed in your majesty and whom you freed from Egypt with a mighty hand. Give thought to your servants Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and pay no heed to the stubbornness of the people. Else the country from which you freed us will say, it was because Adonai was powerless to bring them into the land that God, it was because Adonai was promised to bring the land God had the land promised to them, and because of having rejected them, that their God brought them out of the land and to have them die in the wilderness. Yet they were your very own people, whom you freed with your great might and your outstretched arm. And that's Moses' tactic in arguing with God. It'll look bad for you, God. God never says, they don't deserve it. He knows they deserve it, but he says it will make you look bad. He doesn't argue on behalf of them saying, well, they're just imperfect people. He also could have said, God, you made them this way. They only can do what they can do because you made them this way. He doesn't do that. He instead says, God, yeah, you have it in your power to do it, but don't. It'll make you look bad. So there's an interesting question here. It doesn't say what God, well, we'll read a little bit more so you can see that it's not here. I'll tell you. What about, is God going to say anything to him about the fact that you broke the tablets that I didn't give you permission to break? I didn't tell you to break them. Moses is not responsible for doing anything bad, especially in Deuteronomy, is not going to be condemned for these kind of things. Except here it says, thereupon Adonai said to me, carve out 2 tablets of stone like the first, and come up to me on the mountain and make an ark of wood. I will inscribe on the tablets of stone that were on the first tablets that you smashed, and you shall deposit them in the ark. So there's a little bit of a, yeah, I'll make you another set. Yeah, you broke them. But Moses is now having to do some of the work himself. Now here it doesn't say that Moses inscribed them. That's what it says in Exodus. So it's a little different. Here it says that God inscribed the second set. It says, I will inscribe on the tablets. Now here it also says, put them in an ark. Now we know that they were going to go into the ark anyways. We heard that. We actually learn about the creation of the Ark of the Covenant before he breaks the 10 Commandments. So the Torah portion of Truma and Tetzaveh, where we start to get this discussion of the construction of the Mishkan and all the great things that were there, we know that there's going to be an ark made, but now God is telling him, put them in that ark. Maybe again, so you won't break them. Maybe if
this is foreshadowing. People are going to break all 10 commandments because Moses literally broke
the commandments. Yeah. So it's an interesting point that Sheldon just made. The people break all the 10 commandments. As we said, the book of Deuteronomy is actually telling us, kind of setting up, some people say, the rest of the historical narrative all the way through Kings, where the people then break them. And so he said this is a foreshadowing of the people breaking them, that Moses breaks them, and then of course they break them. So Moses kind of sets up this image of the commandments being broken. But again, it's interesting here that God makes both sets, which is almost again as if to say, it's not like one was different from the other in the sense that Moses carved out the second ones. No, here it says God carved out the second ones, and they're going to be put in the ark. Now here it says, I made an ark of acacia wood and carved out the 2 tablets of stone like the first. And I took the 2 tablets and went up the mountain. Now here, it doesn't seem to be the ark that's mentioned in Exodus, because that ark is a beautiful gold ark that you've seen in Raiders of the Lost Ark. And it doesn't just, it is made out of wood, but it's covered in gold. This doesn't say that. This doesn't say that this ark, or at least the ark that he puts them in, is that kind of ark. At least not to begin with, because it says he carved, he made the ark, right? He made the ark out of wood. And it doesn't say that. Now, again, if it's just Moses, he's up there for another 40 days and 40 nights. Yeah, in 40 days and 40 nights, over that time, he could have made an ark to put the 10 commandments in. So it's very possible, he built a box to put the 10 commandments in, but it doesn't seem like it's the ark that they eventually were in, the golden ark, or the ark that's mentioned in Exodus. It's also mentioned in Numbers. I mean, Leviticus and Numbers. It's there when they even go into battle. So after inscribing on the tablets the same text as on the first, the 10 commandments that Adonai addressed to you on the mountain out of the fire of the assembly, Adonai gave to me. Then I went down from the mountain and I deposited the tablets in the ark that I made, where they still are, as Adonai had commanded me. So it seems as though this ark has been with them for 40 years. So this is an ark that, at least according to here, seems to be one that Moses made. Now, again, traditionally, the answer is it's the same ark. It's the ark that, Moses made with Bezalel and and Hur, I mean, that like they made it, so. The crew around Moses, Joshua, Aholiab, all the people that knew this kind of stuff, they're there. I will tell you, here it says again specifically that the two tablets are the 10 Commandments. At least in Deuteronomy, they're the same. And the reason I say that is because, at least in the sense that we see it at least the way we see it in the movies, it's always they're there on the tablets. But here it says specifically that there are 10 commandments. In the book of Deuteronomy, it says 10 commandments. In Exodus, it really doesn't say these are the 10 commandments. It says these are the words that God spoke to the people, and then Moses goes up and gets the commandments on tablets, but it doesn't say that they're 10 commandments. Here it's very clear that the 10 commandments are what's exactly on the 10 commandments. Some people believe that like on the other side or part of it were also the other commandments, but it doesn't say that. And it says that they're still in an ark. So it says so that's Mount Sinai. Now, here it says from Beherot Bnei Yakan, the Israelites marched to Moserah. And let's see what this note here says. It's recounting Numbers chapter 33, telling us these places. Now, what's interesting about this is that this isn't right after Mount Sinai. From there, they marched from Gudgod to Yotbat, a region of running brooks. And at that time, Adonai set apart the tribe of Levi to carry the ark of Adonai's covenant, to stand in attendance upon Adonai, and to bless God's name, as is still the case. Now, again, they get the book of Leviticus at Mount Sinai. So why does it say it happened later here? It's a little different, This is a slightly different version of events. But what's interesting, of course, about the Levites is that is why Levi has received no hereditary portion along with its kin. Adonai is its portion, as your God Adonai spoke concerning it. So again, the Levites don't get any territory in the land of Israel, because they get to be God's messengers and God's leaders and God's priests in the sense that what's their portion? God is their portion. They don't need a land portion. They get that. And of course, they get the sacrifices to live on. So that's very clear why. And it's illustrated and laid out here in Deuteronomy in a very clear way, which it kind of isn't up until now. It says it flat out. I mean, it's implied, it's there. I mean, you can figure it out. But this idea that the Levites, get to do this stuff, it's not quite as clear. And remember, that's Moses's tribe. That's Aaron's tribe. And the Kohanim, the priests, are only a part of the Levites. So they're not even as elevated as the Kohanim within their group. I had stayed on the mountain as I did the first time, 40 days and 40 nights. Well, wait a second. Wait, I thought we left Mount Sinai. We were already here. We're moving on. He keeps going back. You understand? He doesn't stop. So it's almost as if, as he's telling the story, he just keeps going back to Mount Sinai. As he's recounting the journey, he's back at Mount Sinai. Now, here he says, he says, I had stayed on the mountain as I did the first time, 40 days and 40 nights, and Adonai heed me once again. Adonai agreed not to destroy you. That's the second time at Mount. I mean, that's the same visit, but it's when he went up the second time. But he said it again. And it's the 80 days or so that basically says he's there. And Adonai said to me, up, resume the march at the head of the people, that they may go in and possess the land that I swore to their fathers to give to them. And now, O Israel, what does God Adonai demand of you? Only this, to revere your God Adonai, to walk in divine paths, and to love and to serve your God Adonai with all your heart and soul. So, what is this? Again, keeping Adonai's commandments and laws, which I enjoin upon you today for your good. This next part that starts again at Mount Sinai, he's gone back to Mount Sinai, is now to some extent, and again, there's no marker here, there's no beginning here, but what we're going to now have is, we're about to get into it, the introduction to these laws, to these other laws. So, this is a very famous line. What does God want of you? Revere your God, walk in the divine way, walk in God's ways, and to love and to serve your God with all your heart and soul, which is that famous phrase that we have, which we have again over and over again in Deuteronomy. And then the last part is lishmor mitzvot, to keep the commandments, to keep the laws. So what's interesting about that is that there's my wife. My wife just jumped on.
Yeah, I need your verification.
Okay. My wife is at the Apple store right now because I don't even have a phone right now. Yeah.
So I'm just gonna stay on until they come back, and when I need you, I'm sorry
Right.
to disturb
Thank you.
class,
Yeah.
guys.
I
This
gave
is
my
the
wife
only-
permission to pick up my phone.
Yeah, and they don't have it, so they just went to check. I'm gonna go on mute, Mark, and then when they
Thank
come
you.
back, I'll
Thank
chime
you,
in.
Tracy. Yeah. So I don't have a car. I don't have a phone, but I have a wonderful wife who takes care of at least some of this stuff for me. So these lines, actually, it's not one verse, it's a couple of verses 12 and 13. Also include this line, this word, which we've talked about before, that God's commanded you this day, right? Hayom, which we have over and over again, for good, for your good. So we don't keep these commandments just because God told us to, right? We keep them for our good. So it will be good for us. It's not like God is just telling us to do things because it makes God feel good or it's good for God or God needs it. It's for your good. It's your tov. It's for your goodness. This is why we do it. So these are critical lines, and it gets into this next part of Deuteronomy, which is the laws of Deuteronomy. So Deuteronomy is really kind of divided into 3 sections. We're coming out of the first section. The first section is this introduction is how they got here, how they got to Mount Sinai, how they got through the desert, the struggles that they dealt with. Okay. The next part are the laws that are given in not at Mount Sinai, well, maybe at Mount Sinai, but Moses is going to give to the people before they cross over. That's the section we're into now, the middle section. And then the last section are blessings and curses and kind of Moses saying goodbye and reinforcing that they're supposed to keep the laws. So we're now about to go into the meat, if you will, of Deuteronomy. We're about to enter the part of Deuteronomy where our attention is focused on what are we supposed to do? And we'll get to it. We may even get to it today. We might even start seeing some of those laws. It really starts in chapter 12 in Re'eh, and that partial we start to get to it. So we'll see. But what's important about this section, and to some extent the last section, is the explanations for why these laws are important. And so the laws are important, but if there isn't an explanation for why they're important and why you need to keep them and what the consequences are, it's a little tough. It's a little tough to maybe justify it. What's interesting is that Deuteronomy is a There is a purpose to Deuteronomy. Now, that doesn't mean there's not a purpose to the entire Torah, but Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, Leviticus is for the most part a code and has some similarities even to some extent to Deuteronomy. What's interesting about it though in Deuteronomy is that, and we've said this before, and you're kind of seeing it now as we get into this next section, is that Deuteronomy can be read as a self-contained unit. And at least the theory goes is that Deuteronomy was composed by people who didn't necessarily think you were going to read the previous 4 books. And so really, what Deuteronomy does is give the laws to the people and help them live a life in the land. Now, that doesn't mean the laws of Leviticus weren't important, but if the laws of Leviticus primarily deal with the laws for the priests, and there's some great laws in Leviticus that are not just for the priests. I mean, Leviticus is where we get love your neighbor, love your, ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha, however you want to translate that, love your kinsman, love your brother, love your neighbor as yourself. I mean, there's wonderful laws there, but to some extent, it could be that Deuteronomy was meant to be read as, what do you have to do in order to stay in the land? And that these laws are the ones you have to keep in order not to lose your place. 10 Commandments being obviously paramount, the ones we got at Mount Sinai on the tablets, but the rest of these laws seem to then get to this point, to walk in God's paths, right? Walk in the ways of God, and to love God with all our hearts and soul. And then this last part, to keep the commandments that were commanded to us this day. And it might be the rest of the laws we're about to read. Those laws might have been, again, the laws that the author of Deuteronomy wanted you to keep so that you could always stay in the land. The author of Deuteronomy, at least being not necessarily the person who wrote it, but the person that they want you to know wrote it, which is Moses. That Moses is the one who told you these things. And that's why the entire book is written from the position, from the perspective as the words of Moses. So what it tells us here is that it's for our good. It's for our good. It's not because Moses just gave us these laws. It's not just because God gave us these laws and Moses copied them. There's a reason for it, and it's for our good. Folks, this is important, and people have always recognized it's important because, what does God demand of you? Everybody wants to know that. But that very question is at least the first time that we could say and point to it. What is the theology of the Bible? What is the Bible about from the standpoint of why are we here? What are we supposed to do? What does God want from us? Deuteronomy is the first book of the Bible that spells it out that way. Not just by saying God commanded us stuff at Mount Sinai, but that this is what God wants us to do, and it's for our own good, and it's so we can stay in the land. So here's what we have, what a lot of people say. This is the first theology of the Bible, and it's one theology of the Bible, because most of the scholars, and again, most of I say the big heads, the academicians say that there are 3 theologies that we can identify in the Bible. 3 modes of, well, what does God want? Or why are we here? Is there a sense to this? And Deuteronomy's sense to it is you keep the commandments, you walk in God's path, and you get to stay on the land. Good things will happen to you. Not necessarily, as I said before, to you individually, because I've kind of shared this with you already. Deuteronomy says it's so that you as a people can be okay. Not you as an individual. If you do good things, it's not necessarily that good things will happen back to you. But if all of you do the right thing, if you do the right thing as a whole, as a nation, you'll stay on your land and things will be okay. You won't get conquered. You won't get disease. You won't have bad things happen to you on a national level. On a national level. And that's the theology. That is the theology that's in Deuteronomy. Now, later on in later books of the Bible, and as we continue to read them, especially on Tuesday mornings. I don't know what will happen Wednesday, but in Tuesday mornings, as we're going through the books of the Bible, this concept, this theology of God telling us what to do so that we can be okay, continues all the way through, as we're seeing right now in the book of Jeremiah, stays all the way through the prophets. And we don't get a different theology of the Bible until we hit the book of Job. And when we get to the book of Job, we get a different answer. We don't get this answer anymore. Because in the very famous scene in Job, God speaks to Job out of the whirlwind, out of the tempest, and says to God, God says to, Job had said to God, I don't want to be here. None of this is right. So, I'm not supposed to be here. This is all. And God says to him in a very famous scene, you don't understand, Job. You were not there when I made the world. You can't comprehend why things happen the way they do. You will not understand it. And that is the theology that Job gives us. It's different from this, which is that there's maybe a plan that we don't understand. We can't understand. And that's how Job differs a little bit from this. Now, it could be, again, that Job was written after the exile and after people were trying to come to terms with, well, is God really just making a covenant with us in the land of Israel? Is there another thing that we're supposed to do if we're not living on the land of Israel? We're still here. What's the purpose? What's our reason for being here? And Job gives us an answer, which is that there is a plan. God has a plan. You just don't understand it. And that's the second theology. And then the last theology we get a little later on in the Bible, it's in one of the later books of the it's in the, I say later because we think it was written at a later time, but it's also in the book of Ketuvim, it's in the writings, and it's the book of Ecclesiastes. And Ecclesiastes, at least in most of it, the book of Ecclesiastes, gives us a message that can be summarized as, maybe there's not a plan. Maybe there's just things that happen. And there's a time and a purpose for everything under heaven, but it doesn't seem like necessarily you and I are a part of it. It seems like things just happen and we're running around on the planet and just things happen. We're not part of any plan. It's just things happen. Yeah, we know there's things that happen in a certain place and time, and that's the famous line from chapter 3, right? There's a purpose for everything, but again, what's our purpose here? Maybe we're not exactly part of it. So a lot of people say that was written, Ecclesiastes, under the Greek influence, under a more Stoic philosophy where, maybe you just are here and suck it up and, you're not part of it. It's not, stuff is happening and it's not even that God has a plan and you just don't understand it, but it doesn't seem like maybe just the things just roll by. So that's what Ecclesiastes says. Now, a lot of people aren't real happy with the Ecclesiastes answer because it doesn't seem as traditionally Jewish, but it's in the Bible. So those are the theologies we have in the Bible, those three main theologies, the Deuteronomy, the Job, and the Ecclesiastes theology. That's Jewish theology from the Bible. But that's not the end of the Jewish theology, right? Because Jewish theology continues to develop in the Talmud, in the later periods of the rabbinic period, because by the time of the rabbis, they're starting to say, maybe the purpose is to keep the laws, kind of like Deuteronomy, wherever we are, and to understand God through the Bible, to understand God, because it's here. We just have to uncover it in the Bible. If we read it carefully enough, if we derive enough understandings, we'll get to that. And then that's developed further by rabbis, especially in the Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism, who start to say, maybe the stuff is hidden in there, and we just have to uncover it. Like if we get good enough at reading this stuff, the plan will start manifesting itself and we'll see it, which kind of goes, well, it doesn't really go against Job, but it kind of tells us that maybe that challenge of God, which is you don't understand it, isn't you just don't understand it yet, but then eventually you will understand it. And that here in the Torah and in the stuff that we can't quite see, there is actually a message in there. And so that's the Kabbalistic, which is also again following rabbinic tradition, which is the laws give us that understanding of God, but maybe there's also interesting foundational elements to the universe that are buried in the Torah. We just have to uncover it. We just don't see it. We're not looking in the right place, or it's there, but it's hiding in plain sight. So these are the later theologies we get too. But again, it all comes out of this, which is again, starting to see in Deuteronomy, an answer. Because the answer is you follow the laws and it'll make sense because good things will happen to you. That's what it just said. What does God want? Do these things. Revere God, walk in God's paths, love, serve God, and keep Adonai's commandments. Now, that's out of the relationship with God. That didn't say anything about other people. So this is about what does God demand of our relationship? What's the theology in the sense of theos, meaning God, right? It doesn't explain everything. It doesn't necessarily even talk about other people here at all. But this is the relationship we have with God. And it's not just keeping the commandments. It's also, loving God, serving God, right? So this is a real, the reason I share that with you, pretty important. So tone is starting to change, and we're going to start seeing some new stuff in these next chapters. Mark the heavens to their uttermost reaches, right? They belong to God, Adonai, the earth and all that is in it. Yet it was to your ancestors that Adonai was drawn out of love for them, so that you, their lineal descendants, were chosen from among all the peoples, as is now the case. And that's kind of nice in the sense that you're here, you're their descendants, and you were chosen, right? And again, Kayom Hazeh, to this day. And then it says, cut away, therefore, the thickening about your hearts, and stiffen your necks no more. And here's a very famous phrase that we have, which we also have later on in the prophets. We've talked about it before, because cut away the thickening about your hearts is not exactly the Hebrew. Mary, what is the translation that you have in the King James? Yep. And you've heard that phrase before in the prophets. Circumcise your heart, right? And again, later on in Christianity, Jesus, again, the followers of Jesus who are preaching to Gentiles say, don't worry about your body circumcision. Worry about your heart, your emotional, your mental, your spiritual circumcision. It's a much more graphic and poetic line, obviously, to say that we have we have a foreskin around our hearts, which can be cut away, but not by surgery, not by a scalpel, but by ourselves, by our own actions, by our own work, by our own, by our own intention. We can cut away that hardening of our hearts, that foreskin that goes around our hearts, that doesn't allow us to be, caring people, that doesn't allow us to reach our full potential, because that, to some extent, is like the image here is that cutting it away will allow you to really grow. Which is an interesting idea. Which, in a weird way, may also explain why the covenant of circumcision, physical circumcision, was so important. Because to some extent, as much as people say, well, it had something to do with procreation, maybe it's actually saying, yes, when God commands us to be fruitful and multiply, to some extent, we're opening up that part of our body in order to be fruitful and multiply, and for us to actually be able to, again, remove a part of ourselves so that we can reach our full potential. It's a weird idea, but I think it probably is based, or at least somewhat based, on that concept, which is that cutting that allows us to expand or grow, or to be open to a way. And again, people say, well, circumcision was really a health thing that the Jews figured out, and again, by understanding a little bit about physiology and disease, that going through a circumcision would actually help people from getting many diseases. Okay, well, that's a possibility. But it's also a possibility that it's a spiritual exercise of allowing oneself at the most vital procreative organ to literally say, but the potential is unlimited now because of this act. I think it's at least possible. Yeah. Joyce, were you gonna say something? Oh, sorry.
No, just coughing.
I thought maybe I said something about circumcision that made you sick, but
Absolutely not.
but those are the words that are used. And it's again taken up later on by the prophets. As we've seen on our Tuesday class, this image is also used later by the prophets, but it's first laid out here in Deuteronomy. This is the first time that we've seen this imagery used for our hearts, which again leads then to not being kashay oref, that somehow again that act allows us not to have a stiff neck, which again seems to imply that this opens us up to growth and to movement, right? Into being able to be free because we're not confined by it. And our hearts, again, the thickening of our hearts, that which again, it's not a really good translation, but the hardening or the coat, if you will, of around our hearts will be cut away. Right? So, for your God is a God who is supreme, who is God supreme, is Lord supreme, the great and the mighty, an awesome God who shows no favor, who takes no bribe, but upholds the cause of the fatherless, the widow, and befriends the stranger, providing food and clothing. And this is a phrase that we get over and over again from now on in Deuteronomy. The almanah, the ger, the atom, the orphan, the widow, the stranger. God takes care of those who are most vulnerable. And of course, that phrase, God is the supreme. Adonai ha'adonim, the Lord supreme. Ha'el hagadol hagibor v'hanorah. And we say that every time we say the Amidah, right? Ha'el hagadol hagibor v'hanorah. El elyon gomel, right? And it says gomel chasadim tovim, providing good things providing love and doing these kinds of things. Again, God helping those that are at their weakest, at their most vulnerable point. And so that's the phrase, Ha'el hagadol hagibor v'hanorah. God is mighty, is great, mighty, and awesome. So, and of course, in the context here, it also says, and God doesn't play favorites. It doesn't take bribes. Now that's interesting, of course, because God just said he favored us, but it's not that kind of favoritism. It's the kind of favoritism that comes from people trying to buy God off. You can't buy God off with sacrifices or offerings. You can't buy God off. You can't buy God some really nice thing for the temple and expect for God to take care of you. If you're not doing the right thing, if you're not taking care of people, if you're not acting in an ethical way, a compassionate way, don't expect God to be on your side. Because you too must befriend the stranger, for you are strangers in the land of Egypt, which we're going to get over and over again as well. A reminder that we were strangers in the land of Egypt, that we were at the most vulnerable ourselves. Every one of us, every Jew was a stranger, was in a vulnerable place. And here it says, you must revere Adonai, only your God shall you worship. To God shall you hold fast, and by God's name you shall swear. Now, again, you're not supposed to swear by God's name. So what does that mean? It's a different word. It's a different word here, which is, again, taking God's name in vain is not what it says. It says, again, you are swearing yourselves to some extent to God now. You're holding fast to God. You're attaching yourself to God. You are only attaching yourself to God. Adonai is your glory and your God, who wrought for you those marvelous, awesome deeds that you saw with your own eyes. And again, there's that phrase, you saw with your einecha, with your eyes. Well, their parents did, but still saying yours, right? Your ancestors went down to Egypt, 70 persons, and now your God Adonai has made you as numerous as the stars in the heavens. Now, why do we break it there? Well, we didn't. Christians who broke it there said that was a good place to break it. Well, maybe. But the next line definitely goes with the previous stuff still, right? Love, therefore, your God. And again, it doesn't have to say therefore, but love, ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, the same words that we have in the Shema ve'ahavta. So I'm telling you that, we have to remember, I said it when we read it, that the Shema and ve'ahavta are not really unique in the book of Deuteronomy. They're used in different forms throughout the book of Deuteronomy. It's just laid out there in a way that people thought, hey, it's all here. All of those ideas that are throughout the rest of the book of Deuteronomy that kind of explain what we're supposed to do, they're all there in ve'ahavta. But here, chapter 11 begins with the same words. Or again, part of the same text is this ve'ahavta line, right? Love, therefore, your God Adonai, and always keep God's charge. But shamarta, you're supposed to keep it and guard it. God's laws, God's rules, and God's commandments. Which again, are they different? Are the laws, the rules, and the commandments different? I don't know. I don't know. It gives us three different things. The book of Deuteronomy will oftentimes use these words together over and over again. Hukim u'mishpatim, So these words, sometimes in different order, but mitzvot, hukim, mishpatim, these are all used together. Are they different? Well, some people say that there's like different nuances to them, but we oftentimes group them together. God's laws, God's rules, God's commandments. So mitzvot is always translated as, almost always, I should say always, translated as commandments. Mishpatim, usually translated as rules. And the word chok or kot, the laws, that's translated as those. Later on, the rabbis will say chukot are laws that don't necessarily have a rational explanation, laws that are just there. Mishpatim are sometimes seen as laws that come about through, it's translated as rules, and mishpat come about through decisions where God says, well, because of this, we better do this. It's more conditional or case law. And then mitzvot are kind of like most of the laws. Most of the laws of the Bible are mitzvot. They're there. God tells us what to do. They seem to make sense. They don't really need to have an explanation. Sometimes they have an explanation, but those are the mitzvot. And again, kol hayamim, all of your days. It's like not one day, but every day. But look at this next line. Take thought this day, hayom, that it was not your children who neither experienced nor witnessed the lesson of your God Adonai, God's majesty, mighty hand and outstretched arm, the signs and the deeds that God performed in Egypt against Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and all his land. What God did to Egypt's army, its horses and chariots, how Adonai rolled back upon them the waters of the Sea of Reeds when they were pursuing you, thus destroying them once and for all. What God did for you in the wilderness before you arrived in this place, and what God did to Datan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, son of Reuben, when the earth opened up, right, and swallowed them, along with their households, their tents, and every living thing in the train from amidst all Israel. But that it was you who saw them with your own eyes, all the marvelous deeds that Adonai performed. Now, only some of these people saw it with their own eyes. They'd have to be kids, but some of them would have seen it. But did everybody see that? Well, there's definitely an understanding here that they're at least a lot closer to the events, and that future generations are not going to be able to say they saw it or even knew somebody who saw it. But you all know somebody who saw it. Your parents, your grandparents, your aunts, your uncles, and maybe some of you, but not not the future. Your kids aren't going to be able to say that. They're not going to be able to say it. What's interesting about those things that he just said? He talked about great things that were done for them in Egypt, right? The 10 plagues, they left Egypt, the Yam Suf, the miracle of the Sea of Reeds. It talks about things that are supernatural here, right? These are things that like can't happen unless God makes them happen. They can't happen, right? Right. All, and it kind of says the things that God did in the wilderness, like provide you food and those kind of things. But then it goes back to this story of the earth swallowing up. We read about this in Numbers. But what's interesting about this way that Moses just told us this? It says Datan and Abiram. Who's the guy that we know that did this? Who's the guy that we read about in Numbers? Right? Doesn't actually say it here, but I'm going to try to see if it's interesting, because when it tells us about this, it doesn't mention Korach. His name's not here. Well, we call that Parshat Korach. I mean, that's the Torah portion is called Korach. He's kind of the leader of that rebellion. He was from the Levite tribe, and now he's not even mentioned. The Datan and Abiram are. It doesn't really talk about all the other people that, that were there, who also were part of that band of people that were speaking out against Moses. But Korach is really noticeably absent from this. So it's an interesting thing that Korach isn't mentioned.
The way I'm assuming why he's not mentioned is, like you said earlier, that whoever wrote this thought this is the only book you're going to read, and you don't need to know that book.
Exactly. So why not?
That guy.
He's bad.
Sure.
But what's interesting about Korach, and we know about this, we talked about it before, so you do know this, you may have forgotten it. Korach's kids don't die.
Right.
The Bible tells us later on in the book of Psalms that there are Psalms that are, I showed them to you, that say B'nai Korach. These are the sons or the descendants of Korach, B'nai Korach. These are the Korahites, Psalms of the Korahites. So the Bible tells us that, and the rabbis kind of assume from that even though Korach was not good, his kids were.
That's what's strange, because it's like Aaron, his son's got killed.
Yeah.
Whereas with Korah, his sons didn't.
Yeah. So, I mean, the understanding is that they didn't follow their dad. Now, Datan and Abiram are swallowed up with their whole households, meaning their kids, their family, their grand, everybody gets swallowed up. They're done. Those two lines are done. They're done. So it's pretty important who's mentioned here and who's not. And again, as Mike just said, if we're not reading Korach, if we're not reading Numbers, which is where Korach is, the book of Numbers, chapter 15, if we're not reading that, then we didn't know that Korach was even there, or that, again, we're going to hold him responsible. And you can maybe say that's because Korach's family is still around. And they don't need to be reminded about what their ancestor did wrong, because they didn't do anything wrong. But if people are looking for Datan and Abiram and their line of people, and what happened to the Reubenites, they're gone. That's where they went. They went into the earth. So it was a miracle. It was crazy. It was supernatural. It was not supposed to have happened. And this is another example of God's supernatural deeds. It was you who saw it with your eyes, right? You saw that. And then here's the line again, Ushmartem et kol hamitzvah. Therefore, keep all the instruction that I enjoin upon you this day. Keep it, shamor, keep it, so that you have the strength to enter and take possession of the land that you are about to cross into and possess, and that you may long endure upon the soil that Adonai swore to you, to your fathers, to assign to them and to their heirs, a land flowing with milk and honey. And there it is again. Keep the laws, so that you'll have the strength to do it. And most importantly, that you may long endure on the soil. This is the reason to keep it. Keep the laws and you'll stay on the land. It's a promise, right? I promise you the land, but whether you get to keep it or not, that's up to you. So it's a promised land, but only conditionally. And that's where it tells us it right very clearly. For the land that you are about to enter and possess is not like the land of Egypt from which you have come. There the grain you sowed had to be watered by your own labors, like a vegetable garden. But the land you're about to cross into and possess, a land of hills and valleys, soaks up its waters from the rains of heaven. It is a land which your God Adonai looks after, on which your God Adonai always keeps an eye from year's beginning to year's end. And this is an interesting idea because what is it about the topography? What is it about Israel that is so special? It's that Egypt has to be watered by the people. And what do they mean by that? Well, we know from the Egyptian texts, and we know from the archaeology of Egypt, that Egypt worked by the series of canals and water that came from the Nile that they built. It was amazing. It's amazing infrastructure that the Egyptians created that created the situation so that they could flood the Nile flooded, the water would go into the canals, and that's how they got their stuff watered. And so they call it, it's like a gan. It's like a garden, a green vegetable garden, a green garden. But that requires a guy doing something, a woman doing something, not the land of Israel. The land of Israel soaks up water from the rains of heaven. Now, that's critical because for the people who lived in the land of Israel, it better rain. And the rain is an act of God. God gives us that rain, and it's a miracle in itself. To some extent, it's part of God's plan, because even though they understood that there was a cycle of how the Egyptians flooded their country, got water. The water was there in the Nile. Again, it turned to blood, and it wasn't always good, I guess, but it was always there. The water in the land of Israel only is there when it rains. But what's interesting about it is it says the earth soaks it up, right? And what's interesting about that in that image is that indeed we know from the geology of Israel that Israel has the ability, or certain parts of Israel where it's really pronounced, that Israel has aquifers that run underneath it, that if it rains, that the water is there under the earth, and then of course comes up in wells and in through the aquifers. And so the water is there, but it's there conditionally under on two things: that God gives us the rain that we need, and that when we think about the land, and especially like where you lived, the water will be there when you need it. And it will be like it's life underground when it comes up. And so when people knew where the springs are, where the wells are, this was a really important level of survival for Israel. And we actually, for those who were there with us in the June trip, we actually went to what they call Hezekiah's Tunnel, which is a water tunnel that brings water from one of those springs, the Gihon Spring, and brings it up into Jerusalem, into the old city, or into the area where the temple was, where the palaces were for the king. And so Hezekiah was able to use those springs to hold out against the Assyrians. And we have the tunnel. I mean, we actually have the tunnel. We have the pool. We know where the water was. And so we actually know how this works. This is not like, well, maybe this will happen. This does happen. And the whole system, to some extent, the way that we looked at it, was it's a miracle. And it required God doing his part in order for us to have that water, which meant we had to do our part. So there was a relationship with this, and again, it's with the water.
I wonder how much that compares also with the dangers of the Nile.
because the Nile floodings were far more dangerous. And the Egyptians just kind of took it as a fact of life that if they went near them now, they would very possibly die. Because there's crocodiles in there.
Yeah, I think,
So that was a large part of their mythology, was the crocodile
Yeah.
gods who were there.
so exactly. So the Egyptians had to worship the Nile. They had to. Whereas for us, a God who is the God of the skies, the God that manifests life through rain, is a different type of God. Look, flooding can happen from the skies too, right? You could get wiped out in a flash flood in the dry riverbeds in Israel. It happens every year, actually. One or two people will die because they were hiking and all of a sudden a flash flood came and they didn't even hear rain. I mean, there was no rain there. It was further miles away. And it happens in America or Mexico and places where there are arroyos too. It can happen here, but it happens there. But rain, when it happens, at least the way we saw it, was that God made it happen, and the cycle of it is much more obvious from the standpoint of this is a gift and it'll happen because we did the right thing. And that's the way that's the way the earth is. I mean, that's the way our part of the earth is. That's the way Israel is. And so I think they did see this as, well, there's no crocodiles, right? There's none of this possible death, but it better rain. It better rain. And if it doesn't rain, then God's mad at us. So, look, we're not the only people who believe this, by the way. I mean, we believed it's in our Torah, but I mean, this is why the Greeks worship Zeus. He's a rain god. He's a thunder god. He has thunderbolts. He's a god who's in the clouds, and when the God wants there to be rain, God brings it. So for people who don't live by a main river, by an ocean, God has to be manifest through life, through water, and through rains from the heavens. And that's what the words Hashemayim, right? That this is rain from heaven. I mean, the King James that's there too, right? The rain from heaven, right?
Yes.
Rains from heaven. So, it's not just from the sky, it's from God. It is a land which your God Adonai looks after, on which your God Adonai always keeps an eye, from year's beginning to year's end. God's watching it, the land. If then you obey the commandments that I enjoin upon you this day, loving your God Adonai and serving God, b'chol levavchem u'b'chol nafshechem, same phrase, all your heart and with all your soul, I will grant you the rain for your land in season, the early rain and the late. You shall gather in your new grain and wine and oil. I will also provide grass in the fields for your cattle, and thus you shall eat your fill. And there's that line, V'achalta v'savata, which you read earlier, chapter 7. V'achalta v'savata, and we say uvarachta, and also to bless, but you shall eat and also have your fill. You should be satisfied. So the rain will be so good, right? You'll get the rain in the proper times. You'll gather in all your crops, your produce, right? You'll also have enough rain for your cattle, which tells you that was another real important part of your livelihood, was having enough rain for your cattle. But it's almost as if they're saying, those are the things you really need to get, because those are the things that are like basic sustenance. And if everything goes right, you're going to have water even for your cattle, which, the grass for the cattle is a whole nother level, because, well, for better or worse, I'm not going to preach to you vegetarianism now, but the reality is it takes a lot of grain to feed those cows that you enjoy. If you and I ate that grain instead, a lot more efficient, much more efficient. It's just a fact. You feed that cow for years and years and years, and you can only kill it and eat it once. All that grain that it ate and pooped out for the last 5 or 6 years, You ain't getting it. The poop isn't good for you or for the land either. So it's actually telling you, well, you can have that too, but it's a bonus. And it really should be treated as a bonus. Yeah, and they were drinking, well, they had to. It's the only thing they could drink, right? They couldn't drink anything else. They had water. They didn't have Coke machines, they didn't have lemonade, and they didn't have iced tea. But they did seem to have a lot of wine so that they could mix it with their water. It was very watered down wine, but it was definitely an important drink. And let me just see here. Yeah, I'm just thinking here, does it have to be wine? I know what I have a guess what the King James, how does it translate wine there? It does, it just says wine. Okay, I thought maybe it would say it's vintage. That's the way the word Yerushka is usually translated as your, but it's usually it's the stuff that comes from your vines. But the Dagancha is your grain, and your Yitzircha is the oil. So those are products, right? Those are not just even fruits and vegetables. Those are the things you really need to even have water to some extent. If you think about it, that you need to have water to help you produce it too, right? A lot of these things you need to have water to make the final version of it, right? Because I mean, oil doesn't take water to make, but it does. It is a process, right? It's not just the olives; it's the oil, and so that requires extra work, and it does require water to some extent to make the oil because of the way that they made it, because they would press it out, and it's a multi-step process. But anyways, these are actually like higher levels of produce. It's not just stuff that you pick off and put in your basket. Is what I'm saying. Because grain had to be obviously also they had to. This isn't the wheat. It actually says grain, which is what happens after you remove the chaff. And you get all the stuff you don't eat. So yeah, these are final produce. This is final products. Finished products. That's what we're looking for. All right. So this is all good stuff, right? So if you obey the commandments, then you'll get these things. And by the way, it says rain. Early rain and late rain, which is actually making a difference between the early rains and the late rains. So it tells us that there wasn't just one rainy season. There wasn't just one time that they needed rain. They needed an early rain and then they needed a late rain. Okay. It's
two harvests.
Yes, and they also probably had like two. They needed to have a rain and then probably like a little respite from the rain so that it wouldn't wash everything away, and then ideally another rain that will then like we say, like there's like a January, February type rain where it's raining and it's it's really raining. It can rain for days, and then you get like that helps fill up your cisterns and your wells, and it helps your crops kind of first get set. But then like a later rain in like May, April or May is going to give you the rest of the stuff that you need to like finish off the last produce. So it actually says two rains, a early rain and a later rain in the year. Then it says, take care not to be lured away to serve other gods and bow to them. For Adonai's anger will flare up against you, shutting up the skies so that there will be no rain on the ground and will not yield its produce, and you will soon perish from the good land that Adonai is assigning to you. So very clear what happens. You do not, the punishment for worshiping other gods, God gets angry and the rain stops falling.
That's what happened.
That's why people were always asking themselves when it stopped raining, what have we done? Why are you guys worshiping other gods? Why are you doing the wrong thing? God is punishing.
Something good this year.
Were we doing something good this year? That's what Mike says. Were we doing something good this year to give us all the rain? Well, it's definitely nice to hear that we have rain. I love looking at those pictures of our reservoirs full. It's nice to see water still coming down off the hill.
Bury those dead bodies again.
They have to bury the bodies in Lake Mead. Is that what you're talking about? Yeah, so no,
Drinking that water, just think about it.
oh, please. Yeah, but seeing the water fill up those places like Oroville and all those nice Lake Shasta and all those places that were getting filled up. That's a nice thing to see. And even for in our day when we're not as dependent on it, or we don't think about it because we're not the one harvesting it. It's nice to know that it's there. It's nice to know that people aren't going to be fighting over water like they often do. But in the meantime, I hope we better figure it out because it's going to happen again. And we should take these next couple of years that we have a little bit maybe of less concerns about it. We better start desalinating. I mean, we better get on this. California needs to learn from Israel. Yeah, but we need to learn from Israel. There should be one up and down the state of California. Enough already. Israel has enough so that they have as much water as they need now. I'm not even sure how many they have now, but it's Israel gets everything, every bit of water they need now from the Mediterranean. It does not come from the Sea of Galilee anymore. Very little of it does. So the Sea of Galilee is now finally filling back up a little bit. Yeah. It's going to kill what fish?
That's what they're saying. They said they don't want them.
In the Mediterranean or here? Yeah,
They wanted to build one off the Santa Barbara.
I know. Look, I'm a vegetarian. I love animals. But if some fish die in the process, look, maybe we have to give, I don't know. You have to figure it out, but we need to have water, a stable, continuous flow of water to our state. And so, not to take care of it. What?
Was it the next question about why it's okay to have meat?
The next portion?
Red,
The what?
the red section?
Well, it doesn't say it's okay. It gives us Jesse read ahead a little bit. It gives us, no, it is. It's this week. Yes, it's this week's portion. It's actually the portion we're getting. No, Jesse's correct. Yes, he's not reading it. He's reading the weekly Parsha. We're not, we're behind a little bit. We're a chapter or so behind, but yes, he's absolutely right. In Re'eh, we're very close, folks, is the rules for it. But giving us rules for what animals we can eat does not necessarily give us permission or encouragement that we have to eat them. But yes, there are rules for it if we are going to eat, and there's rules that we can. It doesn't say go out and eat all these animals. It says if you're going to eat these animals, only these animals. And so some people say
We just said.
That means it would be a-
It's followed by-
it's not that it's not okay. It's
We say that we-
what?
These words.
Yes. But wait, Jesse, you were going to say giving us permission to eat them doesn't mean we're supposed to eat them. If I tell you, I give you permission, I'm going to let's say, just give you an example, a weird example, but it's an example that I've thought of from our own house, my own kids. I can give my kids permission to have a drink of alcohol, right? I can say, look, you can drink, yeah, you can, but just because you can doesn't mean I want you to. And again, it's not like I have anything against alcohol. I drink alcohol, but yeah, but I not today, not yesterday, not the day before. Oh, wait. But anyways, the point is that just because you can doesn't mean you're supposed to, and doesn't mean that you should do it all the time. And again, giving somebody permission doesn't say, hey, I want you to do it. It says, okay, if you're going to do it, then do it like this. But the idea, yes, but the idea is you could, but now you can't. So what the point is that if you tell somebody that they can do something, that doesn't mean they should do it. And
jump off a cliff. But you probably
well, even if it's something not as obvious as that, as Mike says, is jumping off a cliff. The reality is that giving people permission to do something isn't the same as telling them to do it. So we have to kind of, when we get to the laws, which we will very soon, the animals, we can think about that. You can discuss that when we get we'll get to that. But these are laws, and again, as Sheldon just said, therefore impress these words upon your very heart, bind them as a sign in your hand, and let them serve as a symbol of your forehead. We just heard that in the Shema Ve'afta. And again, it's a part of this. And it's,
The part before is also.
yes, and these parts are also in the tefillin. And the reason that they're in the tefillin is because these are, is that these tell us again to bind them as a sign upon our hand. Now, is it supposed to be these texts? I don't know. It could be that they were the 10 Commandments. As I already told you, that seems to make more sense than it would be these words. But my words, again, technically could be those words, but it also could be the 10 Commandments, and teach them to your children, reciting them when you stay at home and when you're away. That's exactly what we read in Ve'afta, when you lie down and when you rise up. Teach your children, teach the next generations. And then say it on your, wherever you are, home and on the road, right? When you lie down and when you get up. And then again, inscribe them, kavtam, al mezuzot beitecha uvisharecha, the same line, and you shall inscribe them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. And here it says, specifically right here, to the end that you and your children may endure in the land that Adonai swore to your fathers to assign to them, as long as there is a heaven over the earth. And this is a phrase that we saw even today in the book of Jeremiah, or yesterday, sorry. When Jeremiah is told by God, or God tells him the words, that I make a covenant with these people, just like the sky and the earth will never fade away, the Jewish people will never fade away. Here's the same phrase, as long as there's a heaven and an earth. So this is a phrase that we see not only in Deuteronomy, but we also see it in the book of Jeremiah. And here's again this theology, which is that so that you and your children may endure in the land. It isn't so that good things will happen to them every day. It's not so that they get, special, long life, or that they get to be happy, or they get to be, they always get to be healthy. It says that they can endure in the land, right? It's so that they can stay in their homeland. So this is why, again, we say that this is the theology. This is the belief of what God is doing for us. It's creating this agreement, this understanding, this covenant, that we get the land and we keep the rules, and everything will be good as long as we do that. And how do we do it? By not forgetting it. So again, we put the mezuzah on, we put the tefillin on to remember. But, for a long time, for thousands of years, 2,000 years, it's been that we put those texts in the mezuzah. But it could very well have been that we put on our doorposts the 10 Commandments, or some representation of those 10 Commandments, so that the 10 Commandments were always in front of us, that we're always thinking about it. I don't know. But now we understand it to be these words, which again is kind of like a circular argument, like not a circular argument, but it's a circular reasoning, which is, well, we remember these words which God gave us, which helps remind us of everything in the book of Deuteronomy, including the 10 Commandments, but maybe it was the 10 Commandments themselves. But again, why? Because again, as the rabbi started telling us, it's not just the 10 Commandments. You got to keep all the commandments, not just the 10 Commandments. You got to keep all the commandments. If then you faithfully keep all this instruction that I command you, loving your God Adonai, walking in God's ways, and holding fast to God, Adonai will dislodge before you all these nations. He will dispossess nations greater and more numerous than you. Every spot on which your foot treads shall be yours. Your territory shall extend from the wilderness to the Lebanon, from the river, the Euphrates, right, to the western sea, which is the Mediterranean. So that's all the way from Syria, all the way down to the Mediterranean, from the river of Egypt, which is right about where Gaza is, all the way up to Lebanon. That is a much bigger Israel than Israel currently has, which is why some people say that Israel has not attempted to create a biblical land of Israel, because that would include Lebanon, Syria, part of Jordan, part of Syria, Lebanon, Jordan. And yeah, well, yeah, most of it. Most of it. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't say exactly where in Lebanon, but pretty much at least the part of it that, well, part of it that Israel actually did have control over during the 80s, while southern Lebanon was under Israel's control. It didn't work out, but the part that Hezbollah is in now is definitely part of what God promised us, which is why some people said when Israel took that land in the 80s, that God gave it to us for a reason and we shouldn't have left. Israel kept it as a buffer zone. It was about 10 miles north, went 10 miles north of Israel into Lebanon. It was controlled by Israel for most of the 80s, that southern Lebanon area. And Israel left because there were a lot of Israeli soldiers that were being killed. But the argument was, as long as that area is under Israeli control, then there won't be missiles that can be fired from that area. Now, Hezbollah is in control of that area, and they have upwards of 200,000 missiles and rockets that they could launch at Israel, upwards of 2,000 a day for half a year, maybe. So it could be devastating to Israel if Hezbollah does that, because they can reach most of Israel from southern Lebanon area. Part of why Israel couldn't maintain that area is because it was unpopular for Israelis to lose their sons in southern Lebanon, because the argument is, if we lose 100 Israeli soldiers a year, which is a horrible calculation, but is it worth preventing, perhaps thousands of Israelis dying in a war from southern Lebanon? But it was much more difficult than that, and to some extent, Israel was hoping that the Christian Lebanese that lived in that area would be able to work with them and to be part of that buffer, and it didn't work. They left. The Christian Lebanese left. They went to America, they went to Canada, they went to France. They left Lebanon, they got out. So there was no sizable Christian community that continued to live in southern Lebanon. Hezbollah came in and took it over.
Yeah, we have a neighbor.
Christian Lebanese, yeah. So it didn't work out. Israel was hoping that would work out, but it didn't work out. And so Israel kind of said, we can't keep this territory ourselves. We can't maintain control over it ourselves unless we have a client proxy that can run it. When the Christian Lebanese left, they stayed for a while, but they couldn't do it. It just was too unpopular. So in the meantime, Israel hasn't had any missiles for a little while from Hezbollah, but that's a fear always, is that that's going to open up again, and it could be very messy. I think most Israelis figure it's not a matter of if, but when. And the feeling is that if Iran decides that they'll give Lebanon, Hezbollah, the command to do that, because the Lebanese, especially Hezbollah, is controlled by Iran. And so if Iran says it's time for you to start, hitting Israel with missiles, that'll happen. So that's the fear. And that's one of the reasons why some Israelis said they should never have given that area back. But again, it's not so easy, because unless Israel was prepared to create a 6 or 10, 15, maybe 20-mile buffer zone into Lebanon and say, no one can live in this area. Literally, no one can live in this area. And who's going to allow that? The United Nations isn't going to allow that. World governments aren't going to allow that. So they couldn't do it. And no one's going to say, hey, no one can live in hundreds of square miles of a country because the other country down below doesn't want to get bombed. I mean, that's what Israel would have had to ask for. And that's not going to happen. So I don't know what to tell you. But there were people who said, well, God gave us permission to have it in the first place. And that was part of the argument. And part of the argument is this: every spot on which your foot treads shall be yours, which means once you conquer it, it's yours. Why? Because it just said that. Why? Because I didn't say it. The government of Israel didn't say it. Deuteronomy said it. And so there are people in Israel to this day who say Israel has no right to give back land that they conquered because they conquered it with God's help. And so some of the people who were saying this were the people who 28 years ago, this year, assassinated Yitzhak Rabin. And the reason that they killed him, the people who killed him, and it was one person who killed him, but the school of thought that argued for his murder, which they did, and there were many people who were calling for his assassination. So the fact that one person did it, there were a lot of people responsible for it. But the people who were claiming that he deserved to be killed said it because their argument was Rabin does not have the authority to give up land that God gave to us. So if God gave us territory, wherever it was, in Gaza, in East Jerusalem, in Lebanon, any place where the Israeli army went, you and I and the prime minister or the government of Israel does not have permission to give it up because God gave us that. And you're going against God's word. And so once you're going against God's word, then you can advocate for somebody to be a heretic and to be going against, it needs to be stopped. And that was the logic. That I'm not saying it was right. I'm just telling you what the logic was, what the argument was. He doesn't have the authority to give up the land. Israel can't give up the West Bank, can't give up Gaza because God gave it to us. There are people on the right. So Rabin was on the left. He was part of the Labor Party, and he was considered more to the right. He was a more conservative member of the Labor Party, but he was not a fan of the PLO. Rabin was not a fan of the Palestinians. The famous argument of whether he would ever shake hands with Yasser Arafat, he did, but no one thought he would. Clinton didn't think he would, and he did. And that was a big moment for them that they were able to get Rabin to touch Yasser Arafat. He did not like Yasser Arafat. He never did. He was not a fan of the Palestinians, Yitzhak Rabin, but he felt that for peace that we should do it. Look, ten years later, Ariel Sharon pulled Israel out of Gaza. In about 2005, Israel pulled out of Gaza. Ariel Sharon was one of the heads of Likud. Arguably, at some points, was further to the right than Netanyahu. He was the one who led the invasion of Lebanon. People on the right were flipped out when Netanyahu pulled out of Gaza. He made the Israelis who lived there leave. He sent in the army and pulled them out of Gaza. There were Israelis lived in Gaza, not many, but there were, several thousand. He pulled them out. He literally took the army and they pulled them out of their homes. That's what Ariel Sharon did. People were very upset. No one assassinated Ariel Sharon. But he had a horrible stroke and spent the last several years of his life completely incapacitated in a bed. There were people from the religious camp who said that was Ariel Sharon's punishment. God punished Ariel Sharon. Didn't need to have an assassin do it. God did it. Now you're going to say to yourself, but what about Menachem Begin? He gave back land. And he was on the right. He was the first prime minister of Likud to make it as prime minister, right? So he gave back land. But Menachem Begin didn't have anything bad happen to him. So how do the religious Zionists square that? Because he gave back all of the Sinai. Here's why. It doesn't say that's Israeli territory. What he gave back, and in his mind, he knew it. The territory he gave back was to the river. That's the river of Egypt, which is essentially right where at the end of Gaza, where the Sinai Desert starts. And so when he gave back that territory, he wasn't violating this. He didn't violate that. So that's the understanding in Israel today. Why do I tell you that? Because it's very important to understand where the fault lines are in Israel over giving back land. A lot of it comes right out of this chapter, folks. So when we talk about other parts of the Torah, even other parts of Deuteronomy, when we talk about laws of what animals you can eat, it's interesting and it's important. It's the laws of kashrut. It's informed our lives for 2,000 years. This line here, people die over right now. They die over this right now in the land of Israel. They kill over this in Israel right now. This is the fault line between people in Israel right now who believe that we don't have the permission from God to retreat from any piece of land that we conquer. It comes from this line right here. No one shall stand up to you. Your God Adonai will put the dread and the fear of you over the whole land in which you set foot, as promised. Well, that kind of happened. Now, this is interesting because the Torah portion, the next portion, Re'eh, starts here. Well, this isn't the end of the chapter, though, right? The chapter goes on for another 6 lines or so. But we said this is a good place to break it. And it is a good place to break it. I will tell you, here's an example of a place where I think the Torah is broken better by us than by the Christian sources. As I've told you before, wherever you break Deuteronomy, it's somewhat arbitrary. Because is it really a good place to break it? Well, we just had this great discussion about the land and about how beautiful the land is, how it has water, when you do the right thing, how God will chase out the people and you'll be able to take control over these areas. And then it changes a little bit. But it is part of what we say here is the theology of Deuteronomy. And here it is, even clearer. Re'eh Anochi, and this is the Torah portion we're reading this week. See, this day I set before you a blessing and a curse. Blessing, if you obey the commandments of your God Adonai, that I enjoin upon you, Hayom, this day. And the curse, if you do not obey the commandments of your God Adonai, but turn away from the path that I enjoin upon you, Hayom, this day, and follow other gods whom you have not experienced. A little note here, who you've not experienced and have not proved themselves to you, which it says in the prophet Hosea. So there's an interesting little addition that Hosea builds on the prophet Hosea, who we'll read soon. But he says, you never experienced them. You don't know from them. They've never done anything for you. God has done lots of things for you. When your God Adonai brings you into the land that you are about to enter and possess, you shall pronounce the blessing at Mount Gerizim and the curse at Mount Ebal. And these are 2 mountains that they are about to come to that are in the land of Israel. They're in the area of Samaria, in the Samaritan area. Actually, the Mount Gerizim is still the mountain where the Samaritans believe they're supposed to worship God. It's where they offer up their sacrifices, including the Passover sacrifice. Some of them used to live there. I don't know if any of them are still living in Gerizim in that area. They still go up there.
What do you say we live up north?
Yeah, they live up north and they live even in other parts of Israel. The reason is that area is completely, no, let me rephrase that. The area around those mountains is completely under Palestinian control. Yeah. So there are no people that are not Arab that live in those areas right now because they would die. And it is in an area where it's a little bit further away from Jerusalem. It's a little bit further away from Israel's military and Jewish centers. And so the area of Samaria is a little less, I don't even want to say the word occupied, but we call it, I don't usually use the occupied territories. I don't like that term, so I don't use it, but it's the part of Israel, or a part of greater Israel, whatever you want to call it. It's the area we call Samaria. And we in Hebrew would call it Yehudah and Shomron, Judea and Samaria. That area of Samaria is a little more dangerous. And actually, when I was there in June, 4 Israelis were shot to death at a gas station in Samaria. Not far from this. Yeah. Samaritans Jewish. Well, we didn't for a long time, and we looked down on the Samaritans. But we do know from genetics that they are our kinsfolk. They are Israelites. They're Israelites. I'd say most Israelis today, including most Orthodox Jews, consider them yeah. And they've cast their lot with us to some extent, folks. And the reason I say that is because they're afraid to live there too. It's not like they think the Palestinians are going to make a distinction between who is a Samaritan and who is a Jew. They're good Samaritans. And the reason that Jesus uses that parable, as I've told you before, is because Jesus's audience didn't think there were. It only works because Jesus's friends and his disciples and his students were like, come on, Jesus, there's no good Samaritan. Come on, Jesus, there's not a good Samaritan. And he showed them that there was. And the reason that there is because you never know who can be good, which, by the way, implies that most Samaritans are not good. Doesn't mean, again, his teaching would be, but you still are nice to them because they might be good. But the implication still is, still Samaritan. So the story works, but it works because he's willing to accept that prejudice. I'm not saying he's encouraging the prejudice. I'm not saying that he's saying you should, because at the end of the day, maybe they can do good. But the story only works is if in your mind you know who he's talking about. I'm only pointing it out because we can all think of examples of it today in our own country. Now, we would be careful about doing that because we live at a time when if you even accidentally, unintentionally, without any malice of forethought, say anything prejudice, you're canceled. You're canceled. Bye-bye. So we can't really do those anymore. We can't pull that off and go, but I'm trying to teach a lesson that they're also good people like that. Yeah, you can't do that. You can't do that. You can't use examples of people anymore, because then they're going to get mad and say, but are you saying that this, are you saying that you don't think those people are good? Well, as I've shared this before, I love sharing this modern midrash of the Good Samaritan. And I say midrash because it's a piece of art. It's at Loma Linda Medical Center.
Oh, yeah, you have shown.
So this is the Good Samaritan, the statue of the Good Samaritan. Here's the Kohen, right? There's the Kohen, there's the Levite. They're not looking at the guy down below, right? This is the guy who's injured, the Good Samaritan helps. So the Kohen and the Levite in Jesus's parable, they walk by and they don't do anything. And there you can see, they're walking by. This guy is not even looking. This guy, that's the Kohen. He's wearing a turban. This guy's a Levi, he's wearing like a hat. But these guys are clearly different ethnicity than that guy. When that statue was made, they could pull that off. You can't do that today. People would flip out. The artist who made that made a statement. He was making a statement that at the time, and probably 1960 or whenever when this was made, was trying to make a statement that the white guys are walking past. Right? So that's the statue of the Good Samaritan. Yeah. So people have been running on that for a long time, but we got on the Samaritans again. It's okay. But this is their territory, Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal. This is the area they lived in. And they survived there. There were still a few hundred Samaritans living there up until recently. And they survived everybody. They survived the Romans, they survived the Christians, they survived the Muslims, they survived everybody. And they continued to live there and survive in the land of Israel. It's kind of amazing. So let's read a little bit more. We'll finish up in the end. We're going to finish up at the end of chapter 11, but it's still at the beginning of Re'eh. Both are on the side of the Jordan, right? Beyond the west road, that is in the land of the Canaanites, who dwell in the Arava, near Gilgal, by the terebinths of Moreh, the Elon Moreh, which is mentioned all the way back to Abraham. 4, you are about to cross the Jordan to enter and possess the land that your God Adonai is assigning to you. When you've occupied it and are settled in it, take care to observe all the laws and the rules that I have set before you, Hayom, this day. So that's where we're gonna leave off there. And again, chapter 12 is a horrible place to break, because it finishes with observe all the laws I've set you for you this day. These are the laws that I set before you this day. Well, don't cut it off there, because but again, how do you break anywhere? Because you could say, well, we got to stop now. And we're stopping now because it's 9 o'clock here and 11 o'clock where the Shulmans are right now. But it's very hard to break in the middle of Deuteronomy anywhere, because again, as we come back next week, we're going to read about these laws. And as we said before, as Jesse pointed out, we're going to get to some of the laws of sacrifices, or at least the holiday sacrifices and what you're supposed to do for those kinds of things. And then, of course, we will get to next week what you're gonna eat. It says you may eat to your heart's content, right? Right? You may slaughter. It doesn't say you should slaughter. It says you may slaughter. But we'll get to that. We'll talk about it next week when we talk about what's kosher and what's not kosher. But we're going to get to it, and we're going to get to the laws of kashrut, and
God just scored 2 runs.
excellent. I was supposed to go to that game tonight, by the way, Mike, but I wanted to be here.
Arizona, you're going to be in Arizona?
I'm going to be there tomorrow.
Oh, really?
I'm going there at 8 o'clock, but I could have gone there at 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock and gone to that game. What's the score?
It's just 2-0.
Okay, whatever. I'm something. I almost feel bad for Arizona now. Almost. Oh, Mike just gave me a bad look. All right, everybody. We'll see you. No, I feel bad for him. I love him. All right, everybody. We'll see you soon. Take care, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Take care.
Rabbi.
Wanted to be here. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.